Are you serious? Clara scoffed, her voice laced with disbelief. Never been more serious, Miss Holloway, the janitor replied, his gaze unwavering as he approached the grand piano. In the sleepy coastal town of Seabreeze, where old money clung to its traditions and opportunity rarely strayed beyond familiar paths, Clara Holloway, a spirited musician burdened by expectation, playfully dared the unassuming arts center janitor to play a challenging piece. She never imagined his quiet acceptance would shatter the brittle facade of her world, revealing not only a breathtaking talent that transcended class and prejudice, but also a connection that would challenge everything she believed about love, justice, and the forgotten melodies of a life unfairly silenced. Their story would become a symphony of redemption, a testament to the power of art to bridge divides, and a poignant reminder that true worth often hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to claim its stage. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. Khan, are you serious? Clara scoffed, her voice laced with disbelief. Never been more serious, Miss Holloway, the janitor replied, his gaze unwavering as he approached the grand piano. The Seabreeze Arts Center's annual gala was always a spectacle of polished mahogany, hushed whispers, and the clinking of crystal glasses, a carefully curated symphony of old money and polite ambition. Tonight, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, the chandeliers casting a warm, golden glow over the town's elite. Clara Holloway, perched on an antique settee, felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. The expectations of her family, her legacy, her very name, Holloway, woven into the fabric of this place. She'd just finished her own performance, a technically flawless but emotionally restrained rendition of a Chopin nocturne, which had earned her polite applause and knowing nods from her mother's bridge club. But it hadn't felt real. She yearned for something more, something that resonated beyond the confines of sheet music and social graces. The conversation had drifted, as it always did, to the grand Steinway that dominated the stage, a donation from her great-grandfather, its keys having absorbed a century of Seabreeze's musical aspirations. Clara's childhood friend, Liam, a budding journalist with a penchant for stirring the pot, had challenged her. You claim to know true artistry, Clara, but can you even pick a piece that would truly humble the average player? Something so deceptively simple, yet utterly impossible to master. Clara, a glass of lukewarm champagne in hand, had surveyed the room, her gaze sweeping past the familiar faces, the self-important patrons, the aspiring virtuosos who all yearned for their moment on that stage. Her eyes, by accident, landed on Elias Thorne. He was standing by the back wall, a bucket and a mop handle clutched in his rough hands, a phantom presence in his worn, faded uniform. Elias, the janitor. He was as much a part of the arts center as the gilded frames on the walls. Yet he moved through its opulent halls like a shadow, unseen, unheard, and certainly unacknowledged by most. I'll tell you what, Clara had declared, her voice carrying a little too loudly in the elegant hush, fueled by a mixture of boredom, frustration, and a touch of the champagne. I will pick a piece, a simple, unassuming prelude by Bach that looks easy but demands a soul. And if anyone in this room can play it with the feeling it deserves, I will marry them. A ripple of nervous laughter, polite gasps. Her mother shot her a withering look from across the room. Liam, however, grinned, sensing a story. Bold words, Clara, he'd said. Who do you propose to challenge? Clara, in a moment of reckless impulsivity she would forever regret, and in some ways eternally be grateful for, had pointed. Not at the young prodigy from the conservatory, nor the renowned visiting maestro, but directly at Elias Thorne, the janitor. Him, she'd said, a wry, mocking smile playing on her lips. If the janitor can play it, then he's got more soul than any of you combined, and I'll marry him. The laughter died. An uncomfortable silence descended. A few people tittered, assuming it was a joke, a commentary on the evening's predictable performances. But then, Elias Thorne, the man who had never spoken more than a polite good evening to her, the man whose eyes usually held a distant, almost mournful quality, had done something extraordinary. He'd put down his mop and bucket, slowly, deliberately. His hands, usually scarred and calloused from a lifetime of manual labor, trembled ever so slightly as he straightened his worn jacket. He'd met her gaze, and for the first time, Clara truly saw him. There was no subservience in his eyes, no embarrassment, only a profound, quiet dignity and something else, a spark, an old fire rekindled. "Are you serious?" Clara scoffed again, a nervous laugh escaping her, suddenly realizing the full weight of her impulsive dare. The champagne fizz had evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. This wasn't a joke anymore. "Never been more serious, Miss Holloway," Elias Thorne replied, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly steady, unwavering as he began to walk towards the grand piano. A collective gasp swept through the room. Murmurs erupted, whispers of disbelief and scandal. Clara's mother, Eleanor, began to rise from her seat, a furious blush creeping up her neck. Liam, however, had pulled out his phone, a predatory gleam in his eye. Elias walked slowly, each step echoing in the sudden cavernous silence of the hall. His work boots, though clean, seemed out of place on the polished marble floors. His uniform, simple and stark, was a stark contrast to the tuxedoed gentlemen and bejeweled ladies. He seemed to carry the weight of every unspoken judgment, every class divide, every societal expectation on his shoulders. Yet he walked with purpose, his gaze fixed on the magnificent instrument. Clara watched, mesmerized and horrified, as he ascended the small steps to the stage. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What had she done? This was going to be a disaster, a public humiliation for him, and by extension, for her family. He was going to sit down, fumble through a few notes, and then what? Would she have to apologize? Would he be fired? Elias reached the piano. He paused, his back to the audience, his shoulders slightly hunched. His hands, rough and strong, hovered over the keys, not with the delicate grace of a trained musician, but with a raw, almost primal connection. He breathed in deeply, a sound that, in the absolute silence, was almost audible. Then he sat. He adjusted the bench, not with the practiced ease of one accustomed to the instrument, but with a deliberate, almost reverent care. His fingers, surprisingly long and nimble, stretched over the keys. For a long moment, he simply sat there, a statue carved from shadows, his head bowed. The room held its breath. Clara could feel the tension, thick and suffocating. She wanted to scream, to tell him to stop, to make it all go away. But she couldn't. Her rash words had set this impossible play in motion. Then his fingers descended, not with a flourish, not with a tentative peck, but with a confident, almost heartbreaking certainty. And from the grand Steinway, a single crystal-clear note emerged, vibrating through the silence, echoing through the cavernous hall, and resonating, with an undeniable, profound clarity, deep within Clara's very soul. It was a sound that shouldn't have come from those hands, from that man, and it was utterly, breathtakingly perfect. The single, crystal-clear note Elias had played vibrated through the silence, not just in the air, but in Clara's very bones. It was a sound that had no business emanating from the hands of the Arts Center janitor, and yet it bloomed, rich and full, before his fingers danced, almost impossibly, into the intricate melody of the Bach prelude in C major. It was the same piece Clara herself had played countless times, a deceptively simple composition that demanded not just technical precision, but a profound emotional depth. But Elias didn't just play the notes, he poured his very soul into them. The prelude, often dismissed as a mere exercise, became a lament, a whispered prayer, a soaring testament to endurance. Each note was a breath, each phrase a heartbeat. His eyes, fixed on some distant point beyond the polished keys, seemed to hold a lifetime of unspoken stories, of dreams lost, and perhaps a quiet hope rediscovered. The rough calluses on his hands, so incongruous with the delicate movements, became instruments of exquisite tenderness, coaxing warmth and sorrow from the cold ivory. A collective hush had fallen over the room, far more profound than any polite applause could command. No one dared to speak, to cough, to even shift in their seats. The clinking of glasses had ceased. All eyes were fixed on Elias Thorne, the man who cleaned the floors, now commanding the grand Steinway with a grace that shamed every seasoned performer who had ever graced that stage. Clara felt a tremor run through her. Her breath hitched. The champagne glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering silently on the plush carpet beneath her settee. She didn't even notice. All she could hear, all she could feel, was the music. It peeled away the layers of pretense, the polished veneer of her world, exposing a raw, aching truth she hadn't known she was missing. The technical perfection she strived for in her own playing felt suddenly hollow, a mere echo compared to the vibrant, living heart of Elias's performance. This wasn't just skill, it was devotion. It was pain. It was a voice that had been silenced for too long, finally finding its song. When the final resonant chord faded into the hallowed quiet, the silence that followed was deafening, pregnant with unspoken emotions. Then, a single tear tracked down Clara's cheek. It was followed by another and another, until her vision blurred. She felt a strange mixture of awe, shame, and a burgeoning, unsettling joy. Shame for her cruel, thoughtless dare, awe at the raw, undeniable talent, and joy for the beauty that had just unfolded. Then, the spell broke. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a ripple of bewildered whispers that quickly swelled into a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. My word! The janitor? How utterly preposterous! Her mother, Eleanor, was already beside her, her face a mask of furious crimson. Clara Elizabeth Holloway, what in heaven's name have you done? She hissed, her voice barely controlled, her grip on Clara's arm like a vice. This is a scandal, a humiliation. Your grandfather's name. And that man. Before Clara could form a coherent reply, Liam, a grin splitting his face, was already pushing through the crowd, phone still clutched in his hand, recording every indignant face. Clara, this is incredible, he whispered excitedly, not even pretending to hide his delight. The story of the decade, the janitor, the heiress, and a marriage dare. This is going viral. Clara's gaze was still fixed on Elias. He sat perfectly still on the piano bench, his hands resting gently on the keys, his head still bowed. He hadn't looked up, hadn't acknowledged the stunned audience, the outrage, or even the smattering of bewildered applause that had finally begun to break out from a few brave, artistic souls who had truly been moved. He simply sat there, a silent sentinel, as if he had merely fulfilled a quiet obligation. Finally, he slowly rose. His movement was deliberate, almost weary. He turned to face the room, and for the first time, Clara met his eyes again. They were deep, unfathomable pools, reflecting neither triumph nor apology, but a profound, almost melancholic understanding. In that moment, she saw not a janitor, but a man burdened by a secret, a past, and a quiet strength that transcended his circumstances. He then began to descend the steps from the stage, his gaze still holding Clara's, a silent dialogue passing between them across the rapidly filling void of scandal and shock. The crowd parted for him, not out of respect, but out of a stunned, almost fearful reverence. People actively recoiled, not wanting to touch the man who had just shattered their preconceived notions of order and place. "Mr. Thorne," Eleanor began, her voice quivering with indignation as Elias drew level with their settee. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I assure you, you will be hearing from my attorney first thing in the morning regarding your employment and this utter charade." Elias stopped directly in front of Clara and her mother. His eyes, however, remained fixed on Clara. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger or defiance. His words were soft, yet they cut through the clamor of the room like a sharp blade. "A dare, Miss Holloway, is not a charade when it is accepted," he said, his voice carrying surprising weight. His gaze flickered to Eleanor for a fleeting moment, a hint of something unreadable there, before returning to Clara. "You asked for a soul, Miss Holloway. I believe I delivered." Then he did the unthinkable. He reached into the pocket of his worn uniform jacket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. He held it out to Clara, his expression unreadable. "And a promise, Miss Holloway," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, yet resonating with an undeniable certainty, "is a promise." Clara stared at the box, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. What was inside? And what did he mean? A promise is a promise? Her hand trembled as she reached out to take the ancient-looking box from his calloused fingers. The wood felt warm, smooth beneath her touch, as if it held a lifetime of stories. "I believe," Elias said, his eyes finally twinkling with a hint of something Clara couldn't quite decipher. Mischief? Resignation? "That this makes us engaged, Miss Holloway." He then turned, slowly, and without another word, walked calmly through the stunned crowd, past the gaping faces, back towards the service entrance, leaving Clara standing there, clutching the mysterious box, the entire Seabreeze elite staring at her with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The unspoken promise of her dare had suddenly become terrifyingly real, and she had absolutely no idea what she had just agreed to. The small, intricately carved wooden box, warm and smooth in Clara's trembling hand, felt impossibly heavy. Its weight was not just of wood, but of the unspoken dare, the shattered decorum, and the utterly unforeseen claim on her future. Elias's declaration, "I believe that this makes us engaged, Miss Holloway," echoed in the sudden ringing silence of the Arts Center, the clamor of outrage now a distant hum compared to the frantic beating of her own heart. Her mother, Eleanor, moved first, her face a mask of incandescent fury. "Engaged?" she shrieked, the word tearing through the shocked silence like a thunderclap. Clara, give me that ridiculous trinket. This entire charade is over. You've made a fool of yourself, of this family, and you will not, I repeat, will not, compound this disgrace by acknowledging such an absurd, vulgar proposal. Eleanor snatched at the box, her fingers clawing at Clara's hand. But Clara, surprisingly, held firm. It wasn't defiance. It was an instinct, a sudden, fierce protectiveness over this small, mysterious object. Her gaze, still swimming with tears from Elias's music, was fixed on the box, as if its secrets held the key to this impossible night. "Mother, please," Clara whispered, wrenching her hand away. "Just let me see." With a deep, shaky breath, she pressed the tiny, almost invisible clasp on the side of the box. It clicked open with a soft sigh, revealing a single exquisite item nestled within. A simple silver locket, tarnished with age, etched with an intricate, almost musical symbol. A stylized treble clef entwined with a thorny rose. It wasn't ostentatious, not at all what one would expect from an engagement gift, especially from someone of Elias's perceived station. It was personal, poignant. Inside the locket, two tiny, faded photographs. One, a young woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile, her hair a cascade of dark curls, her arm looped around a younger, bright-eyed version of Elias, a mischievous grin on his face, a mop of dark hair falling over his forehead. He looked so happy, so full of life, so utterly unlike the quiet, haunted man who cleaned the arts center floors. The second photo showed an old, weathered piano, its keys yellowed with age but clearly well-loved, covered in sheet music. A wave of unexpected tenderness washed over Clara, momentarily silencing the buzzing outrage of the room. This wasn't a joke, not for him. This was something sacred, something from his past, an offering of his true self. The locket felt warm in her palm, radiating a history she knew nothing about, but suddenly desperately wanted to understand. Liam, ever the opportunist, pushed past a huffing Eleanor. "Clara, what is it? A ring? What did he give you? My readers are going to eat this up." "It's a locket," Clara murmured, ignoring Liam, her eyes still on the faded images. The young Elias in the photo had a vibrant spark in his eyes, the kind of untamed fire she'd heard in his music. What had happened to extinguish it? To transform that exuberant youth into the silent, almost spectral janitor? "A locket," Eleanor scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "That's hardly a proper engagement ring, Clara. It's a cheap, sentimental bauble from some former life. This is ridiculous. We are leaving, and we will never speak of this again. You are a Holloway, Clara. You have a reputation, a legacy, a future that does not involve that." She gestured vaguely towards the service entrance, where Elias had disappeared. But Clara couldn't move. The locket pulsed with a silent story, a stark contrast to the hollow perfection of her own life. The music he had played still resonated within her, a beautiful, aching melody that demanded answers. How could a man with such immense talent, such a profound connection to music, be relegated to polishing floors? It was an injustice, a cruel irony that gnawed at her. "Mother, stop," Clara said, her voice firmer than she intended. "Did you hear him play? Really hear him? That wasn't just skill. It was something more. He's not who we think he is." Eleanor bristled. "He is exactly who he is, Clara, a janitor. And you, my dear, are allowing a moment of drunken impulsivity to ruin everything. There will be no talk of engagements, no further contact with that man. We will issue a public apology, say you were unwell, or that it was a terrible misunderstanding. The board will handle Mr. Thorne. This simply cannot stand." Clara looked around the room. Every eye was on her, a mix of pity, horror, and barely concealed glee. The Seabreeze elite, her family's peers, her own social circle, they were all judging her, condemning her. Their whispers felt like sharp little needles, pricking at her skin. But beneath the humiliation, a strange defiance began to stir. The music still echoed in her ears, a defiant roar against the polite whispers. The locket in her hand felt like a burning ember, an undeniable truth. How could she dismiss such raw, untamed artistry? How could she dismiss him? "No," Clara said, her voice gaining strength. "No, Mother, I will not. I made a dare, and he honored it. And he showed me something tonight that none of your polished performers ever have. He showed me a soul." Eleanor gasped, taking a step back as if Clara had slapped her. "Clara, you are being utterly absurd. You will regret this." "Perhaps," Clara countered, her gaze unwavering as she met her mother's furious eyes. "But I have to know. I have to know who he is. I have to understand." She gently closed the locket, tucking it carefully into her evening bag, a silent promise to the images within. Liam, ever the journalist, saw the shift, the newfound resolve in her eyes. "So, you're going to see him?" he asked, his voice low, tinged with a predatory excitement. "You're going to follow through on the dare?" Clara looked at the now emptying hall, the grand piano standing silent and majestic, a monument to the extraordinary performance. The air still hummed with the ghost of Elias's music. Her world, once so predictable, had been shattered into a million pieces, yet in its destruction, she saw a path she'd never imagined. "I have to," Clara whispered, a new determination hardening her resolve. "I have to know the story behind that music, and I have to know why a man who plays like that is sweeping floors." She clenched her jaw. "Because if there's an injustice, Liam, I intend to find it, and I intend to make it right." She turned, not towards the main exit where her mother was already summoning their car, but towards the service entrance, the very path Elias had taken. The Arts Center, once a symbol of her gilded cage, now felt like a doorway to a truth she had unknowingly craved her entire life. But as she approached the unassuming door, a low, guttural growl echoed from the shadows of the service corridor, followed by the clanking of something heavy hitting the floor. Clara froze, her hand hovering over the cold metal handle, her heart leaping into her throat. Was Elias still there? And what was that sound? The low, guttural growl that echoed from the shadows of the service corridor, followed by the clanking of something heavy, sent a chill down Clara's spine. Her hand froze on the cold metal of the service door handle. Was Elias still there? And what was that sound? Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to heed her mother's furious warnings and return to the safe, predictable world she'd known. But the memory of Elias's music, the feel of the locket against her skin, and the burning question of why propelled her forward. She pushed the door open slowly, a sliver of darkness greeting her. The corridor was narrow, dimly lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and old dust, a stark contrast to the lilies and perfume of the gala hall. Her expensive heels clicked unnervingly on the concrete floor, each sound amplified in the oppressive silence. "Oh, Elias!" she called out, her voice barely a whisper, a strange mix of apprehension and determination. No answer, only the rhythmic drip of a leaky pipe somewhere further down the hall. She took another hesitant step, her eyes straining to pierce the gloom. She saw it then, crumpled on the floor near a row of industrial cleaning supplies. Elias's uniform jacket, discarded, and a heavy-duty broom that had seemingly fallen. And just beyond them, a faint, flickering light. A sudden, sharp cry of pain, raw and choked, tore through the silence. It wasn't human. It sounded like an animal in distress. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She recognized it instantly, the terrified whimper of a dog. "Hello?" she called again, her voice stronger now, laced with concern. She pushed past the cleaning supplies, the forgotten elegance of her gown brushing against dusty shelves. The flickering light grew brighter, revealing a small utility closet door ajar. Through the crack, she saw him, Elias. He was crouched on the floor, his back to her, his shoulders shaking with a silent, agonizing struggle. In his arms, cradled carefully, was a small, scruffy terrier mix, its fur matted and its leg clearly injured. The dog whimpered again, a low, pained sound. Elias was gently, meticulously, trying to staunch a bleeding wound on its paw with a torn piece of cloth from his shirt. His face, when she finally glimpsed it, was etched with a profound, almost desperate worry. His brow furrowed in concentration, his lips pressed into a thin line. This was a different Elias entirely from the composed, almost regal figure at the piano. This was a man stripped bare, vulnerable, utterly absorbed in the pain of a helpless creature. "Elias?" Clara said again, her voice soft this time, devoid of the earlier apprehension, replaced by a surge of empathy. He flinched, startled, spinning around. His eyes, usually guarded, were wide with surprise, then immediately clouded with something akin to panic. "Miss Holloway, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be back here." He quickly tried to shield the dog from her view, as if ashamed. "I heard a sound," Clara explained, stepping fully into the small, cramped closet. The smell of antiseptic was stronger here, mixed with the faint scent of animal and something else. Desperation. "Is he hurt?" "He wandered in astray," Elias mumbled, still avoiding her gaze, his focus clearly on the whimpering dog. "He must have gotten caught in the loading dock, cut his paw badly. I was just trying to help him." He spoke quickly, almost defensively, as if her presence had threatened to expose some forbidden act. But Clara saw past the words. She saw the tenderness in his rough hands as he stroked the dog's matted head, the concern in his deep-set eyes. This was not a man who merely cleaned the art center. This was a man with a hidden heart, a quiet compassion that shone through his gruff exterior. "You need to take him to a vet," Clara stated, her practical side kicking in. "He needs proper care. That's a deep cut." "I can't," Elias said, his voice flat, resignation heavy in his tone. "I can't afford a vet, Miss Holloway, and I can't keep him here. They'd fire me. Animal control would... I need to bandage it up as best I can and try to find somewhere for him to go." Clara stared at him, a fresh wave of anger washing over her, not at Elias, but at the system, at the stark reality of his life. Here was a man who played with the soul of a concert pianist, yet he couldn't afford a veterinarian for a helpless stray. The injustice of it all, the sheer waste of human potential, hit her with a physical force. "That's absurd," she exclaimed, feeling a sudden surge of protectiveness, not just for the dog, but for Elias too. "He needs help, and so do you. You can't just leave him. Let me take him." Elias looked up, surprise etched on his face. "You, Miss Holloway? With that gown? To an animal hospital? He gestured vaguely at her elegant attire, a ghost of a wry smile touching his lips. It's not exactly the Holloway family's usual Saturday night. Don't worry about my gown, Clara snapped, a defiant spark in her eyes. This dog needs help, and I have a car. And I have money. We're taking him. She knelt beside him, despite the grime, her delicate dress pooling on the concrete floor. What's his name? He doesn't have one, Elias replied, a flicker of hope beginning to replace the despair in his eyes. He's just the Wanderer, I suppose. The Wanderer it is, Clara decided, already feeling a strange connection to the little animal. All right, gently. Let's get him into my car. Together, carefully, they lifted the whimpering dog. As their hands brushed, Clara felt the surprising strength in Elias's arm and the raw vulnerability that lay just beneath his stoic exterior. The small locket in her bag felt heavier, more significant than ever. This was the man who had played Bach like a forgotten angel, the man who was now gently cradling an injured stray in his arms. And she, Clara Holloway, was about to drive him, and the dog, to the emergency veterinary clinic. It was a surreal, almost comical turn of events, a scene utterly removed from the polished gala she'd abandoned. As they navigated the dark corridors, the dog whimpering softly, Clara suddenly remembered Liam, the journalist, the story, the public scrutiny. But a defiant warmth spread through her. Let them talk. Let them judge. This felt more real, more important than any society scandal. Outside, the cool night air was a welcome relief. Clara's sleek black sedan, a gift from her father, gleamed under the moon. She opened the back door, and Elias carefully placed the Wanderer on the plush leather seat, which would undoubtedly be covered in dog hair and blood. Clara didn't care. She slid into the driver's seat, Elias taking the passenger side. The injured dog nestled safely in the back. The silence in the car was different now, not awkward, but thick with shared purpose. She started the engine. "You really don't have to do this, Miss Holloway," Elias said, his voice softer now, tinged with a gratitude that both warmed and unnerved her. Clara glanced at him, his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. The shadows played across his face, highlighting the lines of worry and fatigue. "I do, Elias," she replied, her voice firm. "I absolutely do. And when we're done with the Wanderer, we're going to talk about that music, and that locket, and everything else." Elias turned to face her, his eyes unreadable in the dim light. A tense silence stretched between them, thick with anticipation. Then, just as Clara pulled out of the Art Center parking lot, a piercing flash erupted from the bushes by the entrance. A camera. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen them. Clara's heart sank, a cold dread twisting in her stomach. The story was already out there, twisted and sensationalized, before she'd even had a chance to understand it herself. And what would this photo, of her and the janitor leaving the gala together with an injured stray, mean for Elias? The stakes had just been raised, dramatically. The blinding flash from the bushes hit Clara like a physical blow, a sudden, stark realization that their quiet act of compassion had been instantly transformed into public spectacle. Her heart plummeted. Liam. It had to be Liam, or one of his hungry fellow journalists. The story, already a wildfire, was now completely out of her control, fueled by an image that would undoubtedly paint her as reckless, scandalous, and Elias as, well, as something he wasn't. Elias flinched beside her, his head whipping towards the flash, his face tightening. "Someone saw us," he said, his voice low, heavy with a familiar resignation. They'll twist it. Always do. Clara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. It was probably Liam, she muttered, a fresh wave of anger rising within her. He's a journalist, always sniffing out a scandal. She glanced at Elias, who had already turned back to check on the wanderer, gently stroking the dog's head to calm its whimpers. He seemed less concerned with his own reputation than with the welfare of the stray. This quiet resilience in the face of judgment only solidified Clara's resolve. "Let them twist it," she declared, pushing down the dread. "Right now, the wanderer needs us. Everything else can wait." The emergency veterinary clinic was a sterile, brightly lit haven, a stark contrast to the opulence of the arts center. The staff, accustomed to late-night crises, were efficient and kind. Clara quickly handled the paperwork and payment, ignoring Elias's protests that he would find a way to pay her back. She simply shook her head. "This isn't about money, Elias. This is about doing what's right." While the wanderer was being examined, Clara and Elias sat in the quiet waiting room. The air was thick with the faint smell of antiseptic and nervous anxiety. Clara, still in her ruined gown, felt strangely comfortable, more herself than she had in the glittering halls of the gala. Elias, his uniform still slightly rumpled, looked less like a janitor and more like a man stripped bare, his defenses down. "So," Clara began, breaking the silence, her voice soft. "The locket. The photos." She pulled the small wooden box from her bag, opening it to reveal the silver locket. "Who are they, Elias? The woman? The piano?" Elias took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the faded images. A flicker of pain, a deep, old sorrow crossed his face. "Her name was Maria," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wife." Clara gasped, a sharp intake of breath. His wife. The truth landed like a blow. The locket, the music, the quiet heartbreak in his eyes, it all suddenly made a terrible, profound sense. "I'm so sorry, Elias," Clara murmured, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch his arm, then retreating. "I didn't know." He shook his head, a ghost of a sad smile touching his lips. "How could you? No one in Seabreeze knows. It's a long story, Miss Holloway, a painful one." He paused, his gaze drifting to the bustling clinic. "Maria was a music teacher, taught piano at the local community center in our old town, Harmony Creek. It was a small place, not unlike Seabreeze in its quiet beauty, but very different in its heart. She was a brilliant musician, a natural, with a spirit as vibrant as her music. That piano," he pointed to the photo, "was hers, our pride and joy." Clara listened, captivated, her heart aching for the man beside her. "What happened?" she prompted gently. Elias's jaw tightened. The community center. It was an old building, beautiful but neglected by the town council. There were promises, always promises, of renovations, of upkeep. But they never came. One winter, the heating system failed. Maria, bless her stubborn heart, refused to let her students freeze. She stayed late, tried to fix a burst pipe herself to save her piano, the only instrument many of those children had access to. The building was old, structurally unsound. A section of the ceiling collapsed. He stopped, his voice catching, a raw tremor in his words. She didn't make it." Clara felt a fresh wave of tears sting her eyes. "Oh, Elias," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. That's horrific. I'm so incredibly sorry." The injustice, the senseless tragedy of it all. A passionate musician, a teacher, lost because of neglect, because of promises broken by those in power. "They blamed her," Elias continued, his voice hardening, a fierce, cold anger creeping into his tone. Said she was reckless, that she shouldn't have been there, shouldn't have tried to fix it herself. The town council, the mayor, they covered it up, swept it under the rug, said it was an unfortunate accident, and offered me a paltry settlement, a pittance to keep my mouth shut. Said a public investigation would only tarnish the town's image. He scoffed, a bitter, desolate sound. Image over life. Always. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, Clara saw the depth of his pain, the smoldering embers of a righteous fury. I tried to fight them, Miss Holloway, he said, his voice low and intense. I tried to get justice for Maria. But I was just a janitor, a handyman. They had lawyers, power, connections. They crushed me, took everything. My home, my savings, my will to fight. So I came here, to Seabreeze, to disappear, to clean floors, to be unseen, unheard, because it was easier than fighting a battle I couldn't win. Clara felt a profound sadness, but also a fierce, burning resolve. This was a story of social injustice, of a life shattered by negligence and corruption. And she, Clara Holloway, with all her privilege and resources, was suddenly, fiercely determined to help him. No, she said, her voice clear and strong. Not anymore, Elias. Not unseen. Not unheard. You play the piano with the soul of an angel, and your wife deserved justice, and I, Elias. I have the resources, the connections, the platform that you didn't. We are going to fight this, together. Elias stared at her, a glimmer of something she hadn't seen before in his eyes, a fragile, almost fearful hope. Miss Holloway, you don't understand. The Holloways are old money here. You can't just go up against people like that. It would ruin you. Perhaps, Clara countered, a defiant glint in her eyes. But sometimes, Elias, doing what's right is worth the risk, and I believe you are worth the risk, and Maria's memory is worth it. She smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. Besides, you made a promise tonight. You played, and I said I'd marry you. I plan to hold you to it, Elias Thorne, at least until we get Maria the justice she deserves. Elias blinked, a slow, bewildered expression crossing his face, a faint color rising in his cheeks. Just then, a veterinary assistant emerged from the back. Good news. The Wanderer is stable. We've stitched him up. He'll need a few weeks of recovery, but he's going to be just fine. Relief washed over them both. Elias let out a long, shaky breath. Thank you, he said, looking at the assistant, then at Clara. Thank you both. As they prepared to leave, a wave of exhaustion hit Clara. It had been a monumental night. But as she walked out with Elias, the Wanderer nestled safely in a carrier. A new purpose bloomed within her. The quiet janitor had not just played a piece of music. He had opened a window into a world of injustice she never knew existed. A world she was now determined to illuminate. But as they stepped into the parking lot, the flash of cameras was even more relentless. A swarm of reporters, led by a triumphant Liam, descended upon them, shouting questions, their lenses glinting like hungry eyes. Miss Holloway, is it true you're engaged to the Arts Center janitor? What about the dog? Is he your wedding present? The chaos was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly suffocating. Elias stiffened beside her, his hand instinctively going to the Wanderer's carrier, his eyes wide with a familiar, haunted fear. Their fight for justice had just begun, but the public trial, it seemed, had already commenced. The onslaught of flashing cameras and aggressive questions was a sudden, jarring assault on Clara's senses. Reporters, A hungry pack led by a gleeful Liam surged towards them, their voices a cacophony of sensationalism. "Miss Holloway, is it true you're engaged to the Arts Center janitor? What about the dog? Is he your wedding present?" Elias stiffened beside her, his hand instinctively gripping the wanderer's carrier, his eyes wide with a familiar, haunted fear. The same fear she'd seen when he spoke of Maria's injustice. "No comment!" Clara yelled, pushing through the crush, shielding Elias and the whimpering dog with her body. The air was thick with the scent of cheap cologne and desperation. She could hear Liam's voice rising above the fray. "Clara, give us a statement. The town wants to know." She wrestled open her car door, practically shoving Elias and the wanderer inside, before scrambling into the driver's seat. She slammed the door shut, locking it, the relentless tapping of fingers on her windows echoing in the confined space. She started the engine, peeling out of the parking lot with a screech of tires, leaving the hungry pack in her rearview mirror, their flashing lights shrinking into the night. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the wanderer's soft panting and Elias's ragged breathing. His shoulders were hunched, his hands clenched. He looked utterly defeated, the brief spark of hope from the clinic extinguished. "Are you all right?" Clara asked, her voice soft, laced with concern. Elias shook his head, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "This is exactly what I ran from, Miss Holloway. The attention, the lies, the way they twist everything. It doesn't help. It just makes things worse." Clara felt a fresh wave of determination. "It only makes things worse if we let it, Elias. We control the narrative. We tell the truth." She drove in silence for a few minutes, navigating the quiet, tree-lined streets of Seabreeze. "You can't go back to your place tonight," she finally said. "They'll be there, and the Arts Center will be buzzing. You need somewhere safe. You can stay at my guest house." Elias looked at her, startled. "Your guest house? Miss Holloway, I couldn't possibly imposition." "Nonsense," Clara cut him off, her voice firm. "You need rest, and so does the wanderer, and we need to plan. This isn't just about you anymore, Elias. It's about Maria, and it's about what's right." She pulled up to a set of imposing wrought iron gates, the entrance to the Holloway estate. The sprawling mansion loomed in the distance, a silent, formidable presence. "This is a bit much," Elias murmured, his eyes wide as the gates silently swung open. "It's just a house," Clara said, trying to lighten the mood, though she knew it wasn't. This was the fortress of her privilege, a world entirely alien to him. She parked near a smaller, charming cottage nestled among ancient oaks, distinct from the main house. "This is the guest house. It's quiet, private. No one will bother you here." She helped him carry the wanderer inside. The cottage was warm and inviting, simply furnished but comfortable, a stark contrast to the sterile clinic and the gilded arts center. She settled the wanderer into a makeshift bed she quickly arranged from blankets, ensuring he had water and a small bowl of kibble she found in the pantry. "Thank you, Miss Holloway," Elias said, his voice softer, gratitude clear in his eyes as he watched the dog. "You didn't have to do any of this." "Call me Clara," she insisted, turning to face him. "And yes, I did. I made a promise, and I don't break promises. Now tell me everything. Every detail about Harmony Creek, about Maria, about the town council, every single person involved." He hesitated, then slowly began to speak. He recounted the story of Harmony Creek, a once thriving town whose economy had dwindled, leaving behind a council desperate to maintain appearances, to attract new investors, even if it meant sacrificing its own people, its own soul. He spoke of Mayor Thompson, a smooth-talking politician who prioritized image over infrastructure, of Mr. Davies, the head of the town council, who had overseen the building's neglect, and of the swift, brutal legal tactics they'd used to silence him, to bury the truth about Maria's death. He described the old community center, a place full of laughter and music, now a crumbling monument to broken promises. Clara listened, her anger simmering, growing hotter with each detail. This wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a systemic failure, a pattern of powerful individuals leveraging their positions to oppress the vulnerable. The injustice of it all was sickening. "How long ago was this?" she asked, her voice tight with suppressed fury. 5 years, Elias replied, his gaze distant, lost in the painful memories. 5 years of silence, 5 years of carrying this alone. "Not anymore," Clara declared, her jaw set. "We need proof, documents, eyewitnesses, anything that points to their negligence." Elias shook his head, a weary sigh escaping him. "I tried, Clara. I gathered everything I could, but they shut me down, threatened me. I lost my job, my reputation. I had to leave town with nothing but the clothes on my back and Maria's locket. All my files, all my evidence. They just disappeared. I assumed they were destroyed." A cold dread twisted in Clara's gut. Destroyed evidence, intimidated witnesses. This was far more complicated than she'd imagined. But she wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Not anymore. Elias's story, Maria's story, had awoken something fierce within her. "Then we'll find new evidence," Clara said, her voice unwavering. "We'll go to Harmony Creek. We'll talk to people who knew Maria, who knew about the community center. Someone must remember. Someone must care." Elias looked at her, a profound mix of disbelief and hope in his eyes. "You would do that? For me? For Maria?" "For justice, Elias," Clara corrected him, a determined glint in her eyes. "And because I don't believe for 1 second that a man who plays like you, who cares for a helpless stray like the Wanderer, should have his life, his wife's legacy, buried under the weight of lies and corruption." She stood, her decision made. "We start first thing tomorrow, but for now you rest. And don't worry about the papers. Let them print their sensationalism. We'll give them a real story soon enough." As she walked out of the guest house, leaving Elias with the Wanderer, Clara felt a strange sense of exhilaration mixed with trepidation. She knew her mother would be furious, perhaps even heartbroken by her defiance. The Holloway name, her own future, everything was on the line. But for the first time in her life, Clara felt truly alive, driven by a purpose far greater than her own comfort or social standing. She returned to the main house, the opulent rooms feeling cold and empty. As she climbed the grand staircase, she noticed a single light on in the study. Her father. She hesitated, then pushed open the heavy oak door. Her father, Richard Holloway, sat at his desk, a newspaper spread before him, his face grim. The headline screamed, "Holloway heiress engaged to janitor? Arts gala erupts in scandal." He looked up, his eyes hard and unwavering. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet, almost dangerously so. "What exactly have you gotten yourself into?" His gaze, however, wasn't fixed on the scandalous headline, but on the small, silver locket Clara still clutched unconsciously in her hand. He recognized it. A flicker of something. Recognition? Pain? Crossed his face before he quickly masked it. "Ah, that locket," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. Where did you get that locket, Clara? The question, so simple, was laden with an intensity that sent a fresh wave of dread through Clara. Her father knew something intimately connected to Elias's tragic past, something that would undoubtedly complicate their fight for justice in ways she couldn't yet fathom. The air in her father's study grew suddenly thick, charged with unspoken history. Richard Holloway, usually a bastion of cool composure, looked rattled, his gaze fixed not on the scandalous headline, but on the silver locket still clutched in Clara's hand. "That locket," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper, yet it thrummed with an intensity that sent a fresh wave of dread through Clara. "Where did you get that locket, Clara?" Clara's heart pounded. Her father's recognition of Maria's locket was a seismic shift, indicating a connection to Elias's past that she hadn't even considered. "Elias gave it to me tonight," she stammered, her voice suddenly unsure. "It belonged to his wife, Maria." Richard's eyes, usually so guarded, widened slightly, a flicker of something raw, shock, perhaps grief, or even guilt, crossing them before he quickly masked it. He ran a hand through his impeccably styled silver hair, a gesture Clara recognized as a sign of deep distress. He stood up slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the moonlit grounds, his back to her. "Maria," he murmured, the name heavy with a forgotten weight. "Maria Costa. I knew her." Clara felt a chill. You knew Maria? From Harmony Creek?" Her father turned, his face etched with a complex mix of sorrow and regret. "More than knew her, Clara. I was an investor in Harmony Creek years ago, before you were born. A small, ambitious project meant to revitalize the town. I believed in its potential. And Maria, she was the heart of that town. Her music school, the community center, she made it sing." He paused, his gaze distant. She was a truly remarkable woman. A knot tightened in Clara's stomach. "Then you must know what happened," she said, her voice strained. "About the community center, the collapse, her death. Elias says it was negligence, a cover-up by the town council." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, a deep sigh escaping him. "It was a terrible tragedy, Clara. One that haunted me for years. I was funding a significant portion of the center's repairs, promises that were made to Maria and the town. My company, Holloway Developments, was poised to take over the entire revitalization project." He paused, his jaw tightening. But then there was a sudden, unexpected downturn in the market. A series of bad investments, a rival corporation aggressively undercutting us. We pulled out of Harmony Creek almost overnight. It was a purely business decision, Clara. But I knew, even then, the impact it would have. The funding for the repairs vanished. "You pulled out?" Clara echoed, the pieces clicking into place, forming a horrifying picture. "So you knew the community center was structurally unsound, that it needed immediate repairs, and you just left?" Her father turned fully to face her, his expression grim. "It was a cutthroat business decision, Clara. Survival. If we hadn't pulled back, the entire company, your inheritance, everything, would have been at risk. We were advised by our legal team that any continued involvement, knowing the building's condition, would expose us to immense liability. So yes, we pulled out, severed all ties. It was a cold, hard business decision. A cold, hard business decision that cost a woman her life," Clara cried, her voice rising, anger and betrayal twisting in her gut. "And you said nothing? You let them blame Elias? Let them cover it up? You, a Holloway, with all your power and influence, did nothing to help him, to get Maria justice?" Richard's face hardened. What could I have done, Clara? Intervened directly, admitted our prior knowledge, jeopardized the entire Holloway empire. It was a politically charged situation. The town council was powerful, desperate. They would have dragged our name through the mud, twisted everything to implicate us. We had to protect the company, protect our family. He walked closer to her, his voice softening, a plea in his eyes. I hated it, Clara. Believe me. Maria's death weighed heavily on my conscience. But I had to make a choice. The greater good, the future of this family. I regret not being able to help her, but I don't regret protecting what's ours. Clara stared at him, aghast. Her father, the man she had always admired, a pillar of integrity in her eyes, had been complicit, albeit passively, in this terrible injustice. His business decision had been Elias's ruin. The prestigious Holloway name, which had always represented stability and moral fortitude, now felt tarnished, stained with Maria's blood. This changes everything, Clara whispered, the locket now feeling like a branding iron in her hand. Elias wants justice for Maria, and I promised to help him. You were involved, Father. Your company was involved. That makes it our responsibility. Richard's eyes narrowed. Clara, you cannot possibly mean to get involved in this. This is a 5-year-old closed case, a political quagmire. You'll not only fail, you'll expose us all. The media circus around this fake engagement is already damaging enough. If this comes out, the Holloway name will be dragged through the mud. Perhaps it should be dragged through the mud, Clara retorted, her voice shaking with righteous indignation. If it means Maria gets justice, if it means Elias finds peace, then so be it. You talk about protecting the family name, but what good is a name if it's built on silence and complicity? Richard walked back to his desk, picking up the newspaper. He pointed to Liam's sensationalized headline. This, Clara, is a preview. If you pursue this, if you align yourself with that man, with that story, you will face public humiliation, legal battles, and the complete alienation of every person in our social circle. Your mother will be devastated. Is this truly what you want? To sacrifice everything for a janitor's pipe dream? It's not a pipe dream, Father, Clara exclaimed, tears of frustration and fury welling in her eyes. It's the truth. And yes, if it means I can help right a terrible wrong, then yes, I will sacrifice everything. I will marry Elias if that's what it takes to get people to listen. Richard sighed, a deep, weary sound. Clara, please reconsider. I can help Elias financially, discreetly. A generous settlement, enough to make up for his suffering. But we cannot reopen this case. It's too dangerous for everyone involved. Clara shook her head, clutching the locket to her chest. No, Father. It's not about money. It's about justice. And I won't be silent. I won't be complicit. Elias and I are going to Harmony Creek, and we're going to find the truth, even if it means tearing down everything you've built. Just as she finished speaking, her phone buzzed, vibrating insistently in her pocket. She pulled it out. It was a text message from an unknown number. Leave it alone, Miss Holloway. Some things are better left buried, for your own good, and Mr. Thorne's. A chilling, anonymous threat. Clara looked at her father, then back at the ominous text. Someone was watching them. Someone powerful. And they knew she was planning to go to Harmony Creek. The stakes had just escalated from personal drama to something far more perilous. The anonymous text message, so direct and chilling, sent a cold shiver down Clara's spine. Leave it alone, Miss Holloway. Some things are better left buried, for your own good. And Mr. Thorne's. It was a stark, undeniable threat, escalating their pursuit of justice from a personal quest to a perilous confrontation with unseen forces. She looked at her father, his face still etched with concern, and then back at the ominous message, a silent war raging within her. "What is it, Clara?" Richard asked, noticing her sudden pallor, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Nothing," Clara lied quickly, shoving the phone back into her pocket. She couldn't tell him about the threat, not yet. He would only use it as further ammunition to dissuade her, to protect the family name at all costs. But the message solidified her resolve. Someone powerful was indeed watching, and they were desperate to keep Maria's truth buried. This was no longer just about justice. It was about truth against power. She left her father's study, the unspoken tension heavy between them, and walked purposefully towards the guest house. The air was cool, but her blood felt hot, a simmering defiance pushing aside the fear. Elias was sitting on the porch, a weary figure in the dim moonlight. The wanderer curled at his feet. He looked up as she approached, a question in his eyes. "We need to leave first thing in the morning," Clara stated, her voice firm. "For Harmony Creek. Someone knows we're going. Someone just sent me a warning to back off." Elias stood abruptly, his gaze sharpening. "A warning? From whom?" "Anonymous," Clara admitted, pulling out her phone to show him the text. His face darkened as he read it. "They're watching," he murmured, his voice grim. "The council, or someone connected to them. They were always good at that, at making threats without leaving fingerprints." He ran a hand over his face. "This is exactly what I feared, Clara. You're putting yourself in danger. You should just let this go, for your own safety." Clara shook her head vehemently. "No, Elias. That's what they want. To intimidate us. To make us back down. But if we do, then Maria truly loses. And so do all the other people who might have suffered from their negligence. This isn't just about Maria anymore. It's about holding power accountable. And besides," she added, a fierce light in her eyes, "I don't scare easily, especially not when I know I'm fighting for what's right." Elias looked at her, truly looked at her, and Clara saw a flicker of admiration, a spark of the old fire she'd glimpsed in Maria's photo, rekindle in his eyes. "All right, Clara," he said, a new resolve hardening his jaw. "Then we go. But we go carefully. And we stick together." The next morning, before the sea breeze sun had even kissed the horizon, Clara and Elias, with the wanderer nestled in the back seat, were on the road to Harmony Creek. The grand Holloway estate, her mother's furious, pleading phone calls unanswered, faded into the rearview mirror. The sense of freedom was intoxicating, mixed with the undeniable thrill of embarking on a dangerous, unknown journey. The drive was long, winding them away from the polished coastal elegance of Seabreeze into the heart of rural America. As they drove, Elias recounted more memories of Harmony Creek, painting a vivid picture of the once vibrant town, now tinged with the melancholy of loss. He spoke of Maria's infectious laughter, her tireless dedication to her students, the joy she found in bringing music to every child, regardless of their background. His voice, usually so quiet, resonated with a deep, aching love that touched Clara's heart. She could hear Maria in his piano playing now. She understood the depth of the tragedy. "She always believed music could change the world," Elias said, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. "Even in a small town like ours. She fought for those kids to have access to instruments, to lessons. The community center was her dream, her legacy. Clara gripped the steering wheel, a renewed sense of purpose surging through her. And we're going to make sure that legacy isn't forgotten. Harmony Creek was a stark contrast to Seabreeze. Smaller, quieter, a town that felt frozen in time, its main street lined with boarded-up storefronts and faded grandeur. The economic downturn Elias had mentioned was evident in every dusty corner, every vacant building. The air felt heavier here, thick with forgotten dreams and simmering resentment. Elias directed her to the site of the old community center. What Clara saw made her stomach churn. It wasn't just old. It was a ruin, a skeletal frame of timber and concrete, overgrown with weeds, a gaping hole in the roof where the collapse had occurred. It looked like a tomb, a silent monument to Maria's unjust end. A crude, weathered wooden cross, tied with a faded ribbon, stood leaning against a crumbling wall, Maria's name scrawled on it. They never even bothered to tear it down properly, Elias said, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on the cross. Just left it as a scar on the town. As they got out of the car, the wanderer let out a low growl, sensing the somber atmosphere. Clara noticed a security camera, surprisingly modern, perched on a pole overlooking the ruins. Someone's still keeping an eye on this place, she murmured, a prickle of unease. Their first stop was the town hall, a modest brick building where the current Mayor Jenkins, a younger, seemingly more amenable man than the one Elias described, greeted them cautiously. When Elias introduced himself, the mayor's face visibly paled. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered, clearly uncomfortable. I remember the unfortunate incident with your wife, a terrible tragedy. But the case was closed years ago. An official ruling of accidental death. Accidental death due to gross negligence, Mayor, Clara corrected, stepping forward, her voice clear and authoritative. My company, Holloway Developments, has reason to believe there was a cover-up. We intend to launch our own investigation. She watched the mayor's reaction carefully. He was clearly intimidated by the mention of Holloway Developments, a name that carried weight even here. The mayor began to sweat. Miss Holloway, please. We are a small town. We don't need old wounds reopened. The former Mayor Thompson and Mr. Davies from the council, they handled everything according to the book. Did they? Clara challenged, her eyes unwavering. Or did they prioritize their reputation over human life? We have information that suggests Holloway Developments, under my father's direction, was in talks to fund major renovations before abruptly pulling out. What happened to that money, Mayor? Why were no repairs made? The mayor swallowed hard, glancing nervously at a closed door behind him. I wouldn't know the specifics of past administrations, Miss Holloway. I was not in office then. Perhaps you should speak to former Mayor Thompson or Mr. Davies. They're still around town. Oh, we intend to, Clara said, a steely glint in her eyes. Starting now. Just as they turned to leave, the closed office door behind the mayor's desk opened slightly. A pair of eyes, old and cunning, peered through the crack, then quickly retreated. Clara caught a glimpse of a stern face, a shock of white hair. Who was that? She asked the mayor, her voice sharp. The mayor looked even more flustered. Just an old friend passing through, Miss Holloway. No one important. But the way he avoided her gaze, the nervous tremor in his voice, told Clara otherwise. Someone important was indeed listening, and their presence in Harmony Creek had clearly ruffled feathers. Their next steps needed to be carefully considered. The truth was here, but it was buried deep, guarded by those who benefited from its silence. And now, they knew exactly who was digging. The old, cunning eyes peering from the crack of the office door, followed by the mayor's flustered denial, sent a jolt of recognition through Elias. "That was Davies," he stated, his voice tight. "Mr. Davies, the head of the town council back then, the one who pushed through the cover-up." The confirmation sent a fresh wave of determination through Clara. They were getting closer. "He's still pulling strings," Clara observed, her gaze hardening, "which means he's still got something to hide." They left the mayor's office, the air outside heavy with unspoken tension. The anonymous threat, the security camera at the ruins, and now the furtive appearance of Davies. Harmony Creek felt less like a quaint small town and more like a carefully guarded secret. "We need to talk to someone who knew Maria," Clara decided, turning to Elias. "Someone outside the official channels, someone who might remember details. A friend, a former student, anyone." Elias thought for a moment. There was old Mrs. Gable. She ran the local bakery. Maria loved her apple pie, and she used to give lessons to Mrs. Gable's granddaughter. She was always outspoken, never afraid to tell you what she thought. The bakery was a small, charming shop, its windows displaying an array of freshly baked goods. The aroma of cinnamon and sugar was a welcome respite from the tension. Inside, a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, her hair a wispy white, looked up from wiping down the counter. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Elias, a flicker of something between recognition and sorrow crossing her face. "Elias Thorne," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My dear boy, is that really you? We thought you'd disappeared." Elias managed a small, sad smile. "It's me, Mrs. Gable, and this is Clara Holloway." Mrs. Gable's gaze sharpened at the name Holloway, then softened as she took in Clara's determined expression. "Holloway. Oh, child. You have Maria's eyes, not in color, but in fire. Come, sit." She led them to a small, checkered table in the corner. "What brings you back to this sad place, Elias?" "Justice for Maria," Clara stated simply, laying out their intentions. She spoke of the locket, of Elias's story, of their suspicion of a cover-up. Mrs. Gable listened, her eyes filling with tears as Clara spoke of Maria. "Oh, that poor girl," Mrs. Gable murmured, wiping a tear from her cheek with a flour-dusted hand. "Always so full of life. It was a tragedy, all right. And no, the official story, it never sat right with any of us who really knew Maria. She was meticulous, careful. She wouldn't have been reckless. She was trying to save that old piano, not her own life." "Do you remember anything, Mrs. Gable?" Clara pressed gently. "Any specific details about the building, the town council, anyone who might have seemed suspicious?" Mrs. Gable leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, there were whispers, you see. About money. Holloway Developments, your father's company, they'd promised all that funding for the renovations. Then, poof, gone. And right after that, Mayor Thompson and Mr. Davies started getting very defensive about the center. Said it was financially unviable to renovate, even before Maria, before she died. Did you ever see any documents? Any reports about the building's condition?" Elias asked, his voice strained. Mrs. Gable shook her head. "No, dear. They kept everything locked up tight at the town hall. After Maria's death, they cleared out her office at the center, said it was protocol. But Maria, she was always organized. She kept copies of everything. She was so proud of those renovation plans, the grants she'd secured. she would have had a file somewhere. Her office, Elias breathed, a sudden memory flickering in his eyes. At the community center. I helped her move some things the week before. She kept a small, personal safe in the wall behind a loose brick, said it was for her most precious scores and secrets. A spark of hope ignited in Clara. The ruins. Elias, you remember where it was? Elias nodded, a determined glint in his eyes. Exactly where. We have to go back. As they rose to leave, Mrs. Gable's face clouded with concern. Be careful, children. This town holds its secrets tight, especially when money and power are involved. Mayor Thompson and Mr. Davies, they're not men to cross lightly. They have a lot to lose. Her gaze drifted to the street outside, where a dark sedan had just slowly driven past the bakery, its tinted windows concealing its occupants. Mrs. Gable quickly looked away, a nervous tremor in her hands. Just be careful. The warning echoed the anonymous text, reinforcing the danger. They thanked Mrs. Gable and quickly made their way back to the car. As Clara drove towards the crumbling community center, a new sense of urgency propelled her. That safe, if it still existed, could hold the key. They arrived back at the desolate ruins. The security camera still stared down, a silent sentinel. Elias, with a surprising agility for his frame, navigated the debris-strewn interior, Clara close behind him, holding the wanderer's carrier. The dog, sensing the tension, whimpered softly. Elias stopped at what used to be Maria's office, a small, partially collapsed room. He pointed to a section of the wall where a few bricks were missing. Here, he said, his voice hushed. He began to carefully clear away some rubble. Beneath a loosened section, a small, rusted metal door was visible, barely clinging to the crumbling mortar. It was the safe. With a mix of trepidation and anticipation, Elias tried the handle. It was stiff, rusted, but with a grunt of effort, it grudgingly creaked open. Inside, nestled amidst a few yellowed musical scores, was a thick, waterproofed envelope. Elias's hands trembled as he pulled it out. He tore it open. Inside were a stack of documents. Detailed engineering reports outlining severe structural defects, especially in the roof and heating system. A signed contract from Holloway Developments explicitly outlining their funding for immediate repairs. And a series of damning internal memos from the town council, signed by Mayor Thompson and Mr. Davies, discussing how to minimize financial exposure and control the public narrative regarding the building's condition, specifically before. Holloway Developments pulled out. One memo, dated just weeks before Maria's death, even suggested delaying critical repairs until after a planned inspection by a potential new investor to avoid scaring them off. Clara and Elias read through them, their hearts pounding. The proof. It was all here. Irrefutable evidence of willful negligence, a callous disregard for safety, and a calculated cover-up, all predicated on financial gain and political image, and her own father's company, Holloway Developments, was inextricably linked. The contract was signed by Richard Holloway himself. This is it, Clara breathed, her voice trembling with emotion. This is everything. This proves it all. But just as Elias closed the safe, a sudden blinding light pierced the gloom from the doorway. A harsh voice boomed, "Well, well, well! Look what the cat dragged in! Seems some things just won't stay buried, will they, Thorne?" Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading daylight, stood former Mayor Thompson and Mr. Davies, flanked by two burly, intimidating men. Davies held a heavy crowbar in his hand, a chilling glint in his eyes. They had been waiting. And now, they had them cornered. The confrontation they had feared was finally here, and it was far more dangerous than Clara could have ever imagined. The harsh glare of the flashlight momentarily blinded Clara, casting the menacing figures of former Mayor Thompson and Mr. Davies into stark, terrifying relief. Davies, crowbar glinting in his hand, stood flanked by two burly men, blocking their only exit from Maria's crumbling office. "Well, well, well," Thompson sneered, his voice dripping with false civility. "Look what the cat dragged in. Seems some things just won't stay buried, will they, Thorne?" Clara's heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The waterproofed envelope bulging with damning evidence was clutched in Elias's hand. The Wanderer, sensing the escalating danger, let out a low, nervous whimper from his carrier. They were cornered, vulnerable, and the truth they sought suddenly felt like a heavy burden, one that might cost them everything. "Get out of our way, Thompson," Elias demanded, his voice surprisingly steady, a protective stance forming in front of Clara. "We have what we came for." Thompson chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Do you now, Thorne? And what exactly do you think you have? A piece of paper isn't going to change anything. This town knows how to protect its own. And you're just a ghost from the past. And Miss Holloway here, she's just a meddling little rich girl playing detective." He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Hand over those documents, Thorne. Now, or things could get messy." "We're not giving you anything," Clara interjected, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "These documents prove your negligence, your cover-up. They prove Maria's death was no accident, but a direct consequence of your greed and corruption." Davies, his face contorted in a sneer, raised the crowbar slightly. "Listen to the little lady, Thompson. She thinks she understands how the world works, but some truths are too inconvenient to ever see the light of day, especially when those truths implicate people like us." Just as Davies took another menacing step forward, a sudden blinding flash erupted from the doorway, followed by the rapid-fire click of a camera. Liam, he appeared seemingly out of nowhere, his phone held aloft, capturing every tense, terrifying moment. "Smile for the camera, gentlemen," Liam yelled, his voice laced with triumph. "The public deserves to see who's trying to silence the truth." Thompson and Davies froze, their faces contorting in fury. Liam's sudden appearance had bought them precious seconds, but it also raised the stakes immeasurably. They knew the world was watching now, but that didn't make them less dangerous. It made them desperate. "Get him!" Thompson snarled, pointing at Liam. The two burly men, momentarily distracted, lunged towards the journalist, who, with surprising agility, darted out of reach, still snapping photos. "Now, Elias!" Clara cried, grabbing his arm. "Run!" They didn't need a second invitation. Elias, clutching the envelope, pulled Clara through a gap in the debris, scrambling over crumbling walls and broken glass. The Wanderer, jostled in his carrier, let out a terrified yelp. They could hear the shouts of Thompson and Davies, the thudding footsteps of their henchmen, echoing through the decaying structure. They burst out of the back of the ruins, into a dense patch of overgrown woods. Clara's elegant dress snagged on thorny bushes, her heels sinking into the soft earth. Elias, surprisingly fast despite his build, pulled her forward, his hand warm and strong in hers. "Where are we going?" Clara gasped, her lungs burning, her heart hammering. "My old workshop," Elias panted, pushing aside a low-hanging branch. "Hidden from my days as a handyman. They won't think to look there. Not at first." They ran, adrenaline coursing through them, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Finally, They reached a small, dilapidated shack, barely visible amidst the thick foliage. Elias fumbled with a rusty padlock, and they tumbled inside, collapsing against a workbench, gasping for breath. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and stale oil. "Are you all right?" Elias asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Clara nodded, pulling a thorn from her arm, her gaze falling on the envelope in his hand. "We have it. They didn't get it." Just then, Liam's frantic voice echoed from outside. "Elias, Clara, are you in here? They're right behind me." Elias pulled a loose floorboard, revealing a small crawl space. "Quick, both of you, and the dog, get down there. I'll draw them away." "No," Clara cried, grabbing his arm. "We stick together. What good is the truth if you're not here to tell it?" "I'm not letting you get hurt because of me," Elias insisted, his eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness. "Get down there." But before they could argue further, the flimsy door burst open. Thompson and Davies stood there, their faces red with rage, their eyes fixed on Elias and the envelope. Liam, bruised but defiant, stood a few feet behind them, still recording. "Give me those documents, Thorne," Thompson roared, lunging forward. Elias, with a sudden, unexpected surge of strength, shoved Clara and the Wanderer's carrier into the crawlspace, slamming the floorboard back down. "Go, Clara!" he yelled, just as Thompson tackled him. Clara could hear the sounds of a struggle above her. Grunts, the thud of bodies, Elias's defiant shouts. Fear, cold and paralyzing, wrapped around her. She had come to save him, to give Maria justice, and now he was sacrificing himself for her. She fumbled in the cramped darkness, pulling out her phone, dialing the police, her fingers trembling. "My name is Clara Holloway. I'm at an abandoned workshop near the old Harmony Creek Community Center. Elias Thorne is in danger. Former Mayor Thompson and Mr. Davies are assaulting him." She could hear Thompson's voice, muffled but distinct. "Where are the papers, Thorne? Where did you hide them?" Then a sickening thud. Elias's grunt of pain. Suddenly a voice, calm and strong, cut through the chaos above. "That's quite enough, gentlemen. The police are on their way, and so is my legal team." It was her father, Richard Holloway. Clara gasped, relief washing over her. She heard a sharp intake of breath from Thompson and Davies, followed by a sudden cessation of violence. Her father's voice, usually so reserved, now commanded authority, cutting through the fear like a beacon. "Richard," Thompson stammered, disbelief in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Making amends," Richard replied, his voice firm, "and ensuring that my daughter and Mr. Thorne are safe." "Liam, you have enough footage?" "More than enough, Mr. Holloway," Liam's triumphant voice replied. A few minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet woods. Clara, tears streaming down her face, pushed open the floorboard and scrambled out of the crawlspace. Elias was on the ground, bruised and battered, but alive. Her father was standing over him, a hand extended. Liam was still filming, capturing the arrival of the police and the stunned faces of Thompson and Davies as they were apprehended. Clara rushed to Elias, kneeling beside him, tears blurring her vision. "Elias, are you okay?" He looked up at her, a weak smile on his bloodied lips. "You came back for me." "Always," Clara whispered, helping him sit up. The waterproofed envelope, miraculously still clutched in his hand, was safe. Richard approached, his gaze softening as he looked at Elias. "Mr. Thorne, I owe you and Maria a profound apology. What happened was a tragedy, exacerbated by my company's actions and silence. It ends tonight. Everything. We will ensure justice is served. and Holloway Developments will fund the rebuilding of the Harmony Creek Community Center in Maria's name. A true legacy. He then looked at Clara, a deep, knowing pride in his eyes. You were right, Clara. Some things are more important than reputation, and this is one of them. Days later, the news exploded. Liam's footage, combined with the irrefutable documents, led to the arrests of Thompson and Davies, exposing years of corruption and lies. The story of Maria, the heroic janitor, and the defiant heiress who fought for justice captivated the nation. The Seabreeze Arts Center Board, under immense public pressure and Clara's fierce advocacy, formally apologized to Elias, offering him a position as the center's resident pianist and music director. His music, once unheard, now soared through the grand halls, a testament to Maria's spirit and a promise of a new beginning. Clara stood beside Elias on the rebuilt stage of the Harmony Creek Community Center, rededicated in Maria's honor. The air was filled not with hushed whispers of old money, but with the joyful chatter of children eager for music lessons. The wanderer, now fully recovered and Elias's constant companion, lay contentedly at their feet. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with a love and gratitude that transcended words. You really did it, Clara, he said, his voice soft as he took her hand. You changed everything. Clara squeezed his hand, her gaze lingering on the silver locket she now wore around her neck. We did it, Elias. We brought the music back. He smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached his eyes. So, Miss Holloway, he began, a playful glint in his eyes. About that dare. Clara laughed, a full, joyful sound. A promise is a promise, Mr. Thorne, and I have a feeling our symphony has only just begun. The journey had been perilous, the secrets dark, but in fighting for justice, Clara had found not only Maria's truth, but her own voice, her own purpose, and a love as deep and resonant as any melody. And so our journey through Harmony Creek ends, but the echoes of Elias and Clara's story will resonate long after. This isn't just a tale of a dare and a janitor who played piano. It's a poignant reminder that true worth often hides beneath the surface, waiting for the courage of someone like Clara to see beyond the uniform, beyond societal labels. It teaches us that love can blossom in the most unexpected places, bridging divides that wealth and status often create. More profoundly, it speaks to the power of one voice, one determined heart, to unravel layers of injustice and bring long-buried truths to light. Maria's legacy, once silenced by corruption, now sings through the restored community center, a testament to the fact that integrity, compassion, and the unwavering pursuit of justice can indeed change the world. Clara, in finding Elias's story, found her own purpose, proving that the greatest riches are not found in possessions, but in the courage to do what is right, and in the profound connection of human souls. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like. And for more powerful, meaningful narratives like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.